How brutal is a real brutalist? Coming up on Architecture CodeX.
Architecture CodeX. If you want to see more, subscribe.
The Yale Art Museum, America's first college art museum, began in 1832 with works donated by patriot artist John Trumbull. They have been expanding the collection ever since. Today, from what is displayed, you can see so many different kinds of art and artifacts that it rivals collections from the world's greatest museums, a sort of Cliff Notes version of art history. At first glance, the current museum building looks like an artistic contrast between very old and very new architecture. But in reality, these two wings of the Yale University Art Gallery are just over 20 years apart. So when I made the pilgrimage to see the works of Brutalist architect Louis Kahn at Yale, I found something even more intriguing, a sort of architectural time warp on the streets of New Haven. The first museum, designed by Trumbull himself in 1832, was demolished in 1910. The second building built for the collection, Street Hall, designed by Peter Bonnet White in 1864, still stands on Chapel Street, across from the expanded galleries. This Venice-inspired neo-Gothic revival housed what was the first formal art college in the United States. Augustus Russell Street donated money for the building on the condition that male and female residents of New Haven could take art classes there. Some assert that this building pushed Yale into the collegiate Gothic style that would dominate most of its buildings for the next 100 years. Sure enough, in 1928, across High Street, Yale built the main gallery connected to Street Hall by a bridge of size of sorts. This is over 30 years after the beginning of the modern architecture movement. Frank Lloyd Wright had already built Unity Temple. Peter Behrens had built the AEG turbine factory, and Walter Gropius had just built his Bauhaus. Still, the style of the new gallery at Yale was romantically Romanesque Gothic, designed by Egerton Swartwout. Now known as the Old Yale Art Gallery building, it is a step backward in architecture time, as the arches are rounder, albeit the tracery of the windows is very high Gothic. Inside the building is chock full of medieval fun, spiral staircases, vaults, and even Colonel John Trumbull's tomb, which he shares with his unnamed wife. Swartwout's original wing is a 20th century revivalist building gallantly playing Ivanhoe in stone. This is architecture cosplay. And I have said this before, that it's like that 7-year-old girl who had a fight with her mother so that she can dress like a fairy princess even though they are going to the supermarket or to church. Why can't I dress like a fairy princess every day? And while the aesthetic is anachronistic, it took less confrontation to design the addition as a revivalist building, since revivalism was still a strong movement in the early 1900s. And that is much of the Yale urban campus. Anachronistic buildings, the definition of collegiate Gothic, portrayed only by the modern rigid street grid and lines of metered parking. A truly medieval city would have had more rambling roads. In 1947, architect Louis Kahn joined the faculty at the Yale School of Architecture. In 1950, he spent time in Rome at the American Academy and had a revelation about the monumentality of architecture beyond what the modern international style might permit. We do a deep dive on Kahn's life in Architecture Codex 71 about his Temple Bethel synagogue design. In 1951, when he got the commission for the art gallery at Yale, he had just turned 50 and was only emerging as a preeminent architect. This was his first major solo project. When Kahn's wing opened in 1953, it was heralded as the first modern building at Yale. It is a simple form of modern architecture, particularly when compared with Louis Kahn's later, more brutalist work. The north and west facades are steel and glass walls. The south facade, facing chapel, is a plain brick wall. They meet at the corners at right angles and are perfectly vertical. It is a box with faces completely solid or completely void. Inside, the ceiling over most of the galleries is a triangular concrete web, a fancy two-way waffle slab, structurally supportive but deep enough that the building utilities can penetrate it just below the floor slab above. What makes me like this building even more is its contrast with Swarwart's wing of the museum. The placement of Kahn's wing and the new entrance, a glass wall behind the street brick wall, emphasizes the void between the two buildings and shows me how traditional and modern architecture can meld together, each being true to itself. And again, these two buildings are barely 20 years apart. Now you enter the showy affectation that is the old Yale Gallery through the modern Kahn building. Across the street from the Yale Art Museum is the Yale Center for British Art, the YCBA, also designed by Louis Kahn and opened in 1977, a few years after his death. Admittedly, I walked by it twice before I even noticed it. First, across the street is the Yale Art Gallery, and that is such a dynamic, vibrant facade that it commands your attention. Secondly, the facade of the YCBA has a lot of retail shops along the street, so you're noticing the shops and you don't notice the big museum behind it. This low-rise, block-long kind of development was not unusual in the 1970s, but usually it had offices above. It is well done even if it is not exceptional. You can be cruel and say the building looks boring from the outside, but I think that is purposeful. Kahn's design keeps the streetscape vital, with the commercial spaces and the museum graciously taking a back seat. The volume of the building is quite large, but it does not dominate or loom over this part of the Yale New Haven campus. Most museums, most architects would normally not be this deferential to retail spaces. But I cannot say if this was Louis Kahn's design as a piece of good urbanism to keep this section of the street rather vibrant, or it was a program element devised by bean counters in order to make the building more financially sustainable. The entrance to the YCBA is like the entrance to the Yale Museum across the street, a void in the streetscape, but this time it occurs at a corner. Walking through the void, you enter a lobby which is the full height of the building and reminds me of the synagogue Kahn designed in Chappaqua, which I referenced earlier. Both were designed toward the end of Kahn's career. And as in the synagogue, there is a holy approach to the use of natural light from above at the museum. The roof is a grid of skylights that illuminate concrete frustrums, a sort of stunted pyramid and void. And this is unusual in museums because normally they don't like natural light as the UV will do damage to the artwork. But by this time they were confident that they could treat the glass to reduce any sun damage. On the outside, neither building is very Louis Kahn-y, not very brutalist, not using the broad, strong language of architecture that eventually built Louis Kahn's reputation. Each building is, by design, it seems, refined, understated, and perhaps has been copied so much that they are less impactful on today's senses. Kahn, it appears, purposely worked his exteriors with a more delicate touch, and that is okay. On the inside, we see more use of naked, raw concrete and the interaction with natural and artificial lighting, which enhances the spaces as chapels of art. Long-term viewers of Architecture Codex are aware that the unfortunate term brutalism is derived from the French for raw concrete, béton brut. It has nothing to do with oppressiveness or harshness, as the critics of the style like to use the term brutalism. Long-term viewers also know that I like all forms of good architecture, and good architecture is not limited by style, but rather by purity of execution. All four art museum buildings we discussed in this video were executed with a purity and integrity to the style that the architects selected. And we can see they work harmoniously together, particularly because Kahn's edition and standalone designs were sufficiently deferential to the literal flamboyance of the old Yale Art Gallery. All the buildings we have discussed have had major revitalizations done to them in recent years, but the original designs were preserved. In the way that Yale has become good stewards of the art inside the museums, they have also become good stewards of the art museums themselves. But then you would expect that from a university that has produced more presidents than NBA All-Stars. I'm Michael Molinelli, and this is Architecture Codex.